Good morning and welcome to the Boatnik. Today I'm going to be working on this Com-Pac 16 here. This is a 1993 Com-Pac 16 XL, which is one of their last, maybe their last version before they quit making it. This model was offered with or without the centerboard. This one does not have the centerboard. But what I'm working on today, I'm getting ready to start redoing this hull to deck joint right here. Now on this boat, instead of rivets, it has stainless steel bolts every 6 inches apart, and the majority of it, and then toward the ends, especially at the bow, they're 3 inches apart. A lot of the older boats especially had aluminum rivets, but this is a little bit stronger for sure, you know, having the stainless steel bolts. But I'm going to take and I'm going to use a sander here in a minute, and the first thing I'm going to do is just very, very lightly sand off this edge. I'm not trying to cut into the fiberglass. I'm just trying to get rid of that dirty, cruddy edge so that I can see exactly where the crack is and, you know, where the old adhesive is, to better be able to see where to cut it out. So I'm not, you know, cutting into glass, just cutting down that joint line that's filled with the adhesive caulking. So I'm going to be doing that, and then I'm going to be using an oscillator tool, multi-tool, to go in and cut out the joint. So this is what I'm using to go in and cut this out. And I'm using a dull blade. It'll still take out the caulking without digging into the fiberglass too much. If you use a sharp blade, if you're not real careful, you'll be cutting into fiberglass and not realize it. So the dull blade works good for me. I'm not going to be taking these bolts out unless there's a problem one. So far I haven't seen one that seemed like it was going to be a problem. I just cut between them, and then I cut down to the bolt very carefully, real delicate around those bolts, and you can clean it up without nicking the bolts. If you do nick a bolt or a rivet, if you've got rivets, especially the rivets, if you nick them hard at all, you're probably best off just to replace them. The rivets are 3/16 rivets. These are 3/16 bolts. And the best way to replace one of these bolts is to go ahead and get them about 1.5 inches or 2 inches long. And, you know, when you get them tightened up, then you can just take a vice grips or whatever and bend the excess bolt back and forth 2 or 3 times, and it'll break off, just, you know, flush with the nut. And it kind of locks the nut in place. It makes it so it doesn't vibrate loose. And that's what they did at the factory, I'm sure. You can feel underneath there, and you can tell that they were just broken off. And that's the easiest way to do it. If you try to use a little bitty short bolt, you end up, you can't break it. You end up having to cut it or either leave it long. But if you go ahead and use a longer bolt to start with, you can bend it a couple times and snap it off flush. It locks the nut in place and you're done. But like I say, I'm going to be leaving these, if at all possible, and just cutting between them mostly and then around them. And I'm going to be cutting, I can use the shoulder here of this blade to kind of gauge my depth. And I'm going to be taking out somewhere around 1/2 inch deep, maybe just a little deeper than 1/2 inch. I'm not going to try to cut all the way through because I don't want to break the sealant that's already in there on the inside. But I will be cutting, you know, at least 1/2 inch deep, except for around the bolts. Around the bolts, it'll be 1/4 inch deep or so. And then it, you know, tapers to deeper in between them. And I have done it this way on many, many boats, and I have not ever had one to come back leaking. The other thing I do whenever I put the adhesive caulking in there, and I do use 3M5200 for this, I leave it kind of slightly mounted up on this outer edge just to kind of seal off this whole edge here. And then I put my white tape on, the duct tape on it while it's still wet to kind of hold everything in place, and then put the rub rail back on it while it's still wet. So that's kind of the process. So I'm going to get started here and see how it goes. You know, a lot of debris can come out, so I do wear breathing protection, and it's probably a good idea to wear eye protection as well. But I'm going to start with the sander. And I've just got some 60 grit on here. Sometimes if there's a whole lot of caulking all over the outer edge, I have to use a like a flap disc or something, you know, to get it off a little better. But this is pretty clean here, and I think the 60 grit is going to be fine for it. And by the way, I'm not going to take this rub rail completely off. You notice I've just got it pulled up here and tied up out of the way. I can get down to within the last 6 or 8 inches from the ends at either end without taking it off. And that's all I'm going to do on this boat, because I already know where it's leaking. It's leaking right here on both sides, just right in here. And this is the typical place that they leak, is between the chain plate and about right here. That's where they almost always leak. You know, maybe back into here. They rarely leak at the very extreme ends. Plus, it's wintertime. And when it's wintertime, rub rail, you know, is cold. And if you take it off, you know, it's a lot of trouble to put back on, because you have to heat it with a heat gun and stretch it with something like a come along or something like that, or block and tackle, to get it back on. So being that it's wintertime, and being that I already know that it's not leaking at the ends, the reason I know that, we had 2.5 days of heavy rain when I first got this boat, with it sitting outside, and you know, I got in it with a flashlight and looked. It's the best way to find out where the water's coming in at, is just, you know, take a half hour and sit in the boat with a flashlight and just look. And so I know where the most of the, and again, it's just on this boat, it was not very much water, just a drip here and there, but it was mostly right here. And you can tell right here, because there's some spider cracks right here, that, you know, somebody probably hit the dock hard right there or something. Anyway, we'll see how it goes. Now I can see that joint line there very clearly, and usually there's, you know, excess squeeze out here, but on this boat, it's at least in this little spot here, I don't see any, but the crack is readily visible. So before you sand it, it's a little bit difficult to find that line to cut, but then once you sand it, you can very clearly see where that line is at that I'll be cutting. So that's why I sand it first. Well, I've got it washed down a bit with some soapy water, but you know, a lot of what's on here is the adhesive that was left behind from the duct tape, and I'm using Marine Formula Debond to clean some of that up. You don't absolutely have to, but it's just nice to be able to get things kind of halfway clean before you start redoing. When you use this Debond stuff, you have to neutralize it afterwards, either with water or denatured alcohol. But it is important that this outer lip here, that outer edge, be clean and even freshly sanded, so you've got something really good for that adhesive to bond to.